The idea of marketability is a big driver when you start talking about early adopters that are, say, maybe going to really get behind it because they're like, yeah, I want to do this because it's the right thing to do, and they're pushing the rest of the industry. What happens is you have two sides of that. You have the early adopter that does an amazing project that works great, and everybody's like, wow, you can really do this. It shows that it's doable. It shows it's beautiful. They can get higher amounts of rent or costs for it. It works great. The other side of that is there's the cutting edge is always potentially open to failure. So if you're pushing the boundaries, say, doing something that maybe is not totally 100%, figured out, then there is that potential. And that, to me, a lot of times is more detrimental than, you can have 100 successes and one failure, and everybody looks at the failure and says that doesn't work. So know your soils and know your infiltration. So it's not a one size fits all, we can just do this everywhere, but tons of variation regionally on a site or even in a small area that you're going to get in terms of perk rates. So if you're like using bioretention as a strategy, but you're not really looking at how that incorporates into the different parts of the projects, you're going to have this variability of success in that way. That opens it up to people saying, yeah, I like the concept, but it doesn't work. There's standing water in there. Maybe there's mosquitoes. People start coming up with all sorts of stories. I guess pushing the boundary forward while avoiding big mistakes, but learning from some of the failures that have happened. But from an institutional standpoint, when you start thinking of a municipality that wants to push this, we've been doing stormwater management codes that we actually incorporate into the requirements the need to do all this documentation of all this preliminary, so looking at soils, looking at hydrology, looking at all of those things. A lot of it's in there, but we're expanding it, and with the idea that we're not telling you what decision to make or how to design it, but we're saying as part of what we're asking you to do as a developer is come in with a very informed base for decision making, and then also come in with this determination of like why you've chosen what you've done and why you've not done other certain things.
Sustainability question, there's an O&M dimension to that too. When you talk about the sustainability of the practices functioning over time, science has shown that our current practices are inadequate to meet the goals of protection. So the permit is, so we got the carrot and the stick. I mean, the stick is the permit, and that's pushing us along, but I think there's a lot of carrots out there too, which I think Jason is alluding to, about how while nothing in the LID approach says that you cannot have a large yard, and so forth, there's a way that you can deliver a development using these practices at a cost savings or no cost penalty if it looks a little different. It's not to say you can't build, that we can't have large yards. And so I think, because there's an aesthetic dimension to this that while many of us think it's attractive, that's a sort of a subjective determination. But I think from the science point of view, this works better, and it meets the goals that we have for protection of Puget Sound, and it can be cost neutral, and it does look a little different than traditional, but it doesn't have to look extremely different. I worked on a lot of different projects that are green and sustainable, and in many of those projects, whether you're talking an energy system or a stormwater system, you can often have higher performance with a decentralized approach. But a decentralized approach has that essential challenge, which is how do you manage a decentralized approach? If you have multiple decentralized processes that work better and it's more cost effective to build, it's better. You talk about dollars spent per pound of pollutant removed from the water. It can score very high on all of those, but it leaves the essential question about oversight management and long-term management. And I think essentially that I essentially think is where the front edge of the wave in this industry is right now. I mean, having seen the arc of this stuff from, it was early on when we first were doing pervious pavement, it was like, oh, we've heard of someone in Florida, design pavement that water goes through. What is it? And now it's like, can we build it? And what does it cost? And that arc has moved quite far. including now a lot of the science bearing out the fact that the treatment processes are better, and while we're learning there are some things that still need to get refined, particularly in bioretention soil, but by and large the science is bearing out the fact that it works better. And we're at the point now where how do we manage a decentralized set of practices, and I think that's just something our industry is going to need to come to. I think there'll probably be a carrot and a stick on that issue. I suspect the future permits may consider, requiring. I think there's a lot of ways it could be done. I thought, if you look at the septic world as an example, many counties now, you have an annual operating permit for your septic system, and because the same issue was there. You have all these septic systems out in the world, and how do we know any of them are working? And so now there's annual operator permits for septic systems, which now allow inspections, which now ensure that those things are working and failing ones can get replaced. And I think, I think there are those sort of options are where I think likely things will have to go, because it just works better, and we want to meet our water quality goals, and so we just have to solve that management. The privately built and owned stormwater facilities, ensuring that they are properly maintained, is not a new issue for our industry. That is a long-held issue, and I think it's something that needs to get addressed. Personally, I feel that increasing the accountability for operating private stormwater systems is long overdue if we want to meet our goals, and that goes for traditional and LID. And then with the maintenance, again, there's a whole section on O&M. We'll talk about that. But essentially, yeah, the level of maintenance effort is not extremely different from, in terms of its quantity of maintenance required, the maintenance effort is not different from traditional. It's just different practices. Instead of going out and just vectoring things and replacing cartridges, we're pruning plants and changing mulch. It's not so much more work, but it is a shift, and it means for public works operations folks, it does mean probably some new equipment, some new training. I know, Kitsap, I think, is well known for having, focused crews that they use. They have a kind of an elite team within their public works group that is focused on LID O&M maintenance. And I think those sort of tools are just going to have to happen. And the technology is catching up too. Now there's purpose-built pervious pavement vacs. I don't know if you've seen them, that mount right on Vector trucks. Which is recognizing. So there's technology. So the technology and the science is sort of catching up, and I think we'll get there.
They've been monitoring some of the facilities long term. I think there's some that are now going on 10 years old. The conventional wisdom at the time was these are going to clog up and they're going to fail and it's going to be a disaster. And they're finding actually better infiltration rates now than when they were actually originally installed, which, going back to the comment about there's a huge failure of something, that'll be all over the news, but nobody's going to do an article about, success, long-term success. But again, we need to be able to bring that longitudinal information out to a wide variety of people. And then the idea of the carrot and the stick is interesting from a maintenance standpoint. I've been practicing down in Portland for the last almost 20 years, and City of Portland always had you do your O&M, and you file it with the county, and it goes onto your deed of your property. So the fact that you say, I'm going to maintain this, and if it transfers ownership, the new owner is very aware that there's a stormwater facility. They never had the money for enforcement. So there was all this, you just did the O&M and you put it out and did it. So they got some money, and they started issuing corrective actions to all these people who had gone through the process, maybe bought a property, transferred ownership, had it for a long time. A bunch of people didn't even know they had a facility, because we would go out and be like, oh yeah, that's the swale, and it was completely filled in and replanted with something else. So that education on how this fits in with the site. But the corrective action was the stick that actually said, you have to maintain this and you have to restore this to what was originally permitted. Actually, it was nice because it created this conversation about, from these homeowners or building owners, why this was a part of what was originally designed and incorporated into the long-term maintenance of the property. So I think it's an ongoing process for sure.